Grace and Peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Bible Study, Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And we are looking at our brand new series on the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest speech ever. And this is found in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5 through 7. This week we are looking at the introduction, and there'll be 3 introductory videos looking at just kind of setting the stage for the Sermon on the Mount. Now you might be wondering why I was so bold in calling the Sermon on the Mount the greatest speech ever. Well, let's look at some of the impact this sermon has had. And this is the first lesson, the first week of these lessons, and this is the first video this week. Each week we'll do a different lesson, and there'll be probably about 3 videos per week. The first thing we're going to look at is how much of the Sermon on the Mount is actually quoted or referenced in just common cultural sayings. Here's an interesting list of things I pulled out of the sermon, and look at some of these, and you can pause to read all of them, but one of them, salt of the earth. That's let your light shine. Jot or tittle, or as the Greek would say it, not one iota. I think we actually would develop our cross our T's and dot our I's from this. Just say no. Turn the other cheek. That's probably the most popular one that comes directly from the Sermon on the Mount that people know they're referencing the Sermon on the Mount. Go the second mile. Love your enemies. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't judge. Obviously, do unto others what you want them to do to you. That's a direct reference to the Sermon on the Mount. And a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, there's more things going on, and we're going to look through the Sermon on the Mount for some of these things as we engage in this series. But just think how much of that is actually already in what we talk about in everyday, normal, everyday, just run-of-the-mill, ordinary conversations. And none of those quotes actually reference the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, the first 8 verses of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. These 8 verses are in and of themselves something that has greatly influenced culture. But probably the most significant verses in the Sermon on the Mount is what we have entitled the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer, Matthew chapter 6, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, maybe actual center of the Sermon on the Mount. These verses about how to pray to God are some of the central verses in all of the Christian faith and have been recited throughout the millennium, memorized and practiced by most of the historical and current Christian followers of Christ. There's probably very few pieces of literature, pieces of human history that have influenced our culture as much as the Sermon on the Mount. One that comes to mind is the 10 Commandments, but interestingly enough, the Sermon on the Mount quotes some of the 10 Commandments and references it. So those two are intertwined. But if you want to look at the impact the Christian faith has had on the world, you will not be able to look past the idea that a lot of that has been wrapped up in what the Sermon on the Mount says. Let's just look at some quotes here. And these are just some quotes from various people about the Sermon on the Mount, talking about its impact. Richard Foster, who is an author, Celebration of Discipline, which is a book I love. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is the most valuable piece of knowledge for right living that has ever been given to human beings. You may think that's an exaggeration. We'll talk about that. Martin Luther King Jr. says, "The words of this text glitter in our eyes with a new urgency. Far from being the pious injunction of a utopian dreamer, this command is an absolute necessity for the survival of our civilization. Yes, it is love that will save our world and our civilization. Love even for enemies." And he's referencing just the love your enemies, just a small fraction of what the Sermon on the Mount is. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, somebody who died resisting Hitler in Germany. Simple surrender and obedience, not interpreting it or applying it, but doing and obeying it, is his conversations about what we should be doing about the Sermon on the Mount. One of my favorite authors, Dallas Willard, in the Divine Conspiracy, which is kind of a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, calls it the most influential such teachings ever to emerge on the face of this weary planet. It also says unique and uniquely deep and powerful. Mahatma Gandhi says, "I was simply overjoyed and found my own opinion confirmed where I least expected it," in talking about the Sermon on the Mount. Kurt Vonnegut, "Some of you may know that I'm neither Christian nor Jewish nor Buddhist nor conventionally religious person of any sort. If it weren't for the message of mercy and pity in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, I wouldn't want to be a human being." And now going to somebody like a lot of those people have passed on, David Platt, a current and contemporary pastor, this most majestic sermon from the greatest preacher who ever lived. So looking through the Sermon on the Mount is something that is astounding piece of human literature. The greatest speech ever is not by any small means something we could say about the Sermon on the Mount. So over the course of the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at it. One, looking at it as a whole, and then also looking at it piece by piece, interpreting it based on what the other parts of the Sermon on the Mount says. We're going to show the respect to this piece of work that it obviously deserves. Question for you to think about and wrestle with until we meet again, and this is where I will leave you. Do you think that the Sermon on the Mount is the most profound teaching on how to live ever given? If yes, then why? If no, then why? And so, as always, there are 3 ways to join this: in person Sunday nights at 7 p.m. or live Monday nights at 7 p.m. via Zoom. These weekly wrap-ups will be posted on YouTube and on my WordPress blog site. I am always on social media. You can find me Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Those links are in the description. And just to highlight some things, on my Instagram account, you will see quotes from Jesus throughout this entire semester and term. On the TikTok account, I'm going to be doing book reviews, and especially book reviews that deal with the Sermon on the Mount, some of the books I've read to prepare for this series. WordPress, you'll see these videos posted. YouTube, you'll see these videos posted as well. And Twitter's probably going to echo some of the Instagram posts as well. So follow me on the social media for content related to what we're doing in these Bible studies. It's been great talking to you, and I hope to see you again real soon.